3 years of continuous global warfare carries a physical weight. For Americans on the home front, that weight settled into an agonizing silence. Following the Potsdam Declaration issued on August 11th, the terms were set. Japan must surrender unconditionally or face utter destruction. While the Allied governments waited, thousands of anxious citizens gathered quietly outside the White House gates, watching the doors for any sign. Inside, the atmosphere was entirely devoid of celebration. President Harry Truman sat at a remarkably neat desk, projecting a quiet, unsmiling bureaucratic formality as he reviewed the message that had just arrived. Reading the text, he confirmed the details. The Japanese government offered a full, unqualified acceptance of the Potsdam terms. There were no caveats and no conditions. The second the briefing concluded, the physical tensions snapped. Reporters scrambled over each other, sprinting out of the executive mansion to relay the news over the wires. That brief, dry diplomatic exchange was the spark. The confirmation instantly converted nearly 4 years of global trauma into the largest, spontaneous, uncoordinated celebration in American history. When the news broke over the radio on the West Coast, it was exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon Pacific time. In San Francisco, workers dropped what they were doing and immediately emptied downtown office buildings, pouring directly into the streets. The most intense local release happened in the city's Chinatown. Residents there broke out massive crates of firecrackers they had intentionally hoarded for years, detonating them in a continuous, deafening roar. Further north, in Seattle, the reaction took on a distinctly military flavor. For the sailors and soldiers stationed there, processing their survival meant shedding the stiff discipline they had lived under. One Navy photographer found his own undignified way to cope with the sudden lack of wartime stress, staging a highly irregular photo op with a young woman posing playfully on his shoulders. The impromptu shoot was actually a deeply specific inside joke. They were openly mocking Fleet Admiral William Halsey, who recently boasted about his ambition to ride the Japanese emperor's white horse through Tokyo. Out west, the immediate reaction was localized and deeply personal. People were shedding their specific cultural anxieties and military tensions first, right before the sheer math of the crowds began to take over the rest of the country. As the news rolled into the Midwest, the scale of the gathering in Chicago caused the city's infrastructure to simply buckle under the weight of its own citizens. This map illustrates the shift. Within hours, over 1 million people flooded tight downtown corridors. Forming massive chains of dancing, this kinetic energy spilled completely over the sidewalks, entirely paralyzing the transit system. Up to that Tuesday afternoon, a crowd of that magnitude had never assembled for any reason in the history of the Windy City. Chicago's massive influx of people shifted the dynamic. The million-person crowd generated a self-sustaining cycle of collective hysteria. Chicago showed how quickly the event evolved. Individual relief had merged into a singular, overwhelming phenomenon that bypassed standard social order. But the absolute peak of this national catharsis concentrated in a single intersection on the East Coast, New York City's Times Square. Fueling themselves entirely on unconfirmed rumors, an estimated 2 million people had packed themselves shoulder to shoulder, waiting in the streets since the early morning hours. The anticipation held until exactly 7 o'clock in the evening, when President Truman's official announcement was finally broadcast to the massive square. The lid blew off. The crowd erupted into a deafening roar, and suddenly tens of thousands of American flags dotted the massive throng from edge to edge. The physical stamina of that crowd was astonishing. The screaming, the laughing, and the sheer kinetic output continued at a fever pitch, entirely unbroken for 24 straight hours. The 24-hour roar was the physical manifestation of nearly 4 years of suppressed anxiety being released at once. New York never celebrated like this before, because they had never faced and survived a conflict this total.